everyone, welcome to Watch It Paint It. Today I'm going to be painting Julie from Arcadia Quest Inferno as requested by one of our subscribers, Magnus Herstrand. As always, I'll start with showing you the paints that we'll use in the tutorial, quite a lot in this episode, and I'll show you the model we're starting with. So it was requested because she's got a crystal which looks to be quite difficult to paint, and as you'll find out, I found it quite difficult too, so disclaimer, you might not like it, but stay tuned and have a look. So we'll start, as I always do, with the Arcadia Quest models and do her skin. Now normally I've used a coloured primer for the skin, but for this model I wanted white for the wings, and white's one of the harder colours to paint over the top, so I've just primed her in matte white by the Army Painter to begin with. So for once I'm painting in all of her skin, so her hands, her face and her ears. Next I'm using Cayman green by Vallejo, and I'll be painting in her robes. So I'm being careful around all the parts of the skin that I've painted, but the rest I'm not too fussy about. Being quite careful on the hair though, because she's quite a pale blonde, and that's going to be painful painting over the top of quite a dark green with a very light colour. I'm using the regiment brush for everything so far. Hopefully you can see that it's quite a large brush, so I'm applying the base coat quite quickly. Not being careful around the base because I'll be painting over that in a much darker colour. Again, being careful around the wings because they're mostly staying white. So next I'm picking up Dead Flesh by Vallejo. This is a pale yellow / brown. It's similar to the Skeleton Bone by Army Painter or Zombie Flesh. And this is for the sort of highlights on a robe. So around the edges of her sleeves and the pattern, her shoulders and down the centre of her robe. So hopefully you can see that's what the robe and the skin will look like after it's base coated. So next I'm picking Desert Yellow. This is the base coat for her hair. It's quite a sandy yellow, and from the picture she looks like she's quite a light blonde. So I'm painting this as the undercoat, the base coat to her hair. It'll give quite a dusty blonde look and feel by the end. So again, being careful around the bits I've painted and the wings. Next I'm choosing Warlord Purple, which is quite a vibrant purple, pinkish purple by Vallejo, and I'm still using the regiment brush for all of this, as you can see, and I'm painting the base coat of a crystal. So that's all the base coating done now. So I'm taking the Survivor shader, which is the black shader, and as I've shown previously, colouring in around her eyes, the edges of her eyes, giving them a nice outline. And then, as I normally do, it's the zombie shader next for the skin tone. This is the sort of pale brown. So I'm being a lot more accurate than I used to be now, and just catching the bits I want the shader to pull in. I'm choosing the Plague shader here, which is Army Painter's green shader, for just giving that sort of tint of green that you can see on her fairy wings. So I'm just applying that as evenly as I can and just getting it in those little recesses on the wings. But I'm basically using this to apply just a tint. In hindsight, maybe I should have just painted it a very, very pale green and highlighted it up, but I chose at the time to use a shader. Also applied a little bit in the darkest areas of her robe there. So next I'm moving on to Beasty Brown to start doing her eyes, her chibi eyes, and spoiler alert, these are some of the best chibi eyes I've ever painted. So, and unfortunately a lot of it's off camera. So that was taking the Beasty Brown and doing the whole of the iris, and then I take the Plague Brown and I'm applying a smaller part to the bottom of the iris. Hopefully you can see that there. And then I'm dotting in some pupils with the black. I'm just touching up her skin where I caught a little bit there. Then finally I'm just adding a tiny dot of white to her eyes there using the Insane Detail brush. That's just to give the illusion of light reflecting out of her pupils. There'll be a close-up of her eyes coming up shortly. So that was just me applying the first highlight of the skin, which was just using the Survivor Skin Neat. And now I'm going to be mixing in some beige, Brainmatter beige, which is white, into the survivor skin. So you can see I'm taking a good dollop of the survivor skin, and then I'm mixing in a tiny bit of white at a time until I get the sort of tone I want. So I'm probably going to go for about 75-25% here. And then I'll take the detail brush and I'll highlight the raised parts of the skin, so a nose, a cheekbones, a chin, eye bones, where her eyebrows would be. And then I'm doing a little bit more, taking a bit more survivor skin and mixing in more white this time. You can see it double dollops this time. And I'm mixing it next to where I previously mixed the white. Apologies, the palette's quite messy today, but nobody brought me any Pringles, so I'm just using the same lid that I had last time. And hopefully you can see that it's next to it, and that's a lot paler than the last highlight I did. So now I'm using the detail brush again and just dabbing the very, very edges of her nose, her cheekbones, her lips there, and the tips of her ears as well. And I'll also do her fingers, just to catch the bit where all the light would be hitting the extremities of her skin. So hopefully you can see she's starting to look more realistic. Flesh is more believable. So that's the skin highlighted. So I'm going to highlight the robe next, which is taking the same green as I base coated it with, that Cayman green. And I'm just using the regiment brush and applying a generous layer to all the raised parts of the model, leaving the deepest recesses still shaded. Then I'm going to take the top sort of level of the highlight, which is the camouflage green, and I'll have mixed this with the Cayman green about 50-50, and I'm just again going round and adding quite a generous layer or line of this 50-50 mixture to all of the raised areas. This is adding this sort of second level of highlight. Hopefully you can start seeing that coming to fruition. It's looking more 3D. And then finally I'll finish the highlight of this with just some neat camouflage green. And I'll just be catching the very, very edges of all of her folds in her fabric and the tops of her sleeves. Hopefully you can see that's quite bright, so that's really going to make the model pop on the gaming table. So I'm going back to the dead flesh next, which is to do the details on her cloak, so her shoulders and the pattern across it and the stripe down the middle of the top. So I'm just applying this with the detail brush, but I'm basically retracing my steps from before, but around the edges where it meets the rest of the robe, I'm just leaving it shaded. So I'm going to use the zombie skin here to highlight up the final highlight on the details, and I'm just going to take the detail brush and very, very carefully apply a little bit of zombie skin all the way around the edges of all those items. And I'm going to move on to highlighting the crystal next, which is taking this squid pink, and I'm going to highlight all the sides of the crystal here, leaving the edges in the dark purple. And this will look quite drastic to begin with, but then I'm going to take the original base purple and mix those two together about 50-50 and start trying to blend it in so the edges and the sides all meet more realistically. Hopefully you could see that we're starting to look a lot more realistic. And then I'm going to take the Brainmatter beige and mix that in with the squid pink and start lightening up some of the areas as per the picture of Julie, and try and get that crystal looking a lot more like it does in the picture. And slowly increasing the amount of white in the mixture, and as I'm doing that I'm moving towards the edges, so the edges are getting more and more white, leaving the pink towards the middle of each side as the picture demonstrates. As I did mention, this is my first time painting a crystal ever, so bear with me. With that, I've finished highlighting the crystal, so I'm going to go on to the wings next, which is just taking the Brainmatter beige from the Army Painter, which is the white, and I'm just going to apply that from the edge of the wings and blend it inwards towards her body. I'm using the detail brush here, and I'm just taking my time and carefully applying it and spreading it towards the center. And this is quite a long process, and then I'm just catching those raised like ridges along her wings. So hopefully you could see the process there. It's quite a long process. And I'm going to move on to the final highlight now, which is her hair. I'm taking the zombie skin and I'm dry brushing this on, so scraping a tiny amount of paint across all the ridges in her hair. Once that's done, I'm going to take the Brainmatter Beige. I'm going to use this neat and just again dry brush this onto her fringe to give an effect that the light's really just hitting the front of her face. Hopefully you can see that there, and that looks very similar to the picture of her. So something I don't normally do here, I'm taking gloss and I'm applying that to the crystal and her eyes to give a sort of shine, some realism to the two items. As normal, I'm going to go on to doing the base now with Mornfang Brown. I'm using my model holder here, which if you haven't catch the video, I've done a review of it. That's available from Quick Draw Supplies, and I'll put a link in the description below. And it's very, very useful, as you can see, making light work of that. And next, once that's dried, I'm going to use Agril and Earth, as I do with all the Arcadia Quest models I paint, and apply a very, very generous layer of it around the bottom of her robe there, forming the base nicely. The thicker the better with this. I've had a few questions about it, and I've had no problems with Agril and Earth, but I do it very, very thickly now. And there you can see Julie's finished. So I'm a bit on the fence about the crystal, but the rest, I think that's the best blonde hair I've ever done, and definitely the best chibi eyes I've done. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you can see the outcome. That took about an hour and a half to finish, to give you some perspective on time. Bit of a close-up of her eyes. And there we go. So, after a week of editing this video, I decided I wasn't happy with the crystals, and I've coming back to highlight the edges in white instead. So have a look at that. Let us know in the comments if you preferred it with the dark edge or the light. I think I prefer the light. I think it makes it look more realistic. As always, if you paint this model yourself, do take a picture and come and share it with us on Facebook. I'll leave the link at the end of the video. And if anybody else has a request for which model they'd like to see next, like Magnus did, leave a comment below. And thank you all for watching.